A more intimate experience for me, and I'm really grateful for that, because that doesn't usually happen. So let me just get the machinery fired up here. I had a funny thing in mind. I was going to introduce myself as a plumber. That's my profession. Basically unclogging humanity's energy system. You do have to roll up your sleeves and get in there sometimes. It can be pretty intense. You know, for those of you who don't know, I worked as an intuitive counselor for a number of years. Between 1998 and 2005, I did 500 readings for people. And what I did was to enter into their dream space as a part of... I would wake up in the morning and I would have a dream, and then that dream would actually be for the client. Yeah, lower the lights might make it a little brighter. I want to still be able to see everybody though, otherwise I'll feel naked up here. Okay, so yeah, so my story kind of goes, I was raised by two intellectual hippie parents, very much children of the 60s. My father was kind of like the Good Morning Vietnam guy. He was at this Long Bend base, one of the largest bases in Vietnam, and he was writing about rock and roll music, which at that time was a very controversial thing to do. My mother teaches piano, and so I had a musical foundation to my upbringing. I always was hearing music being played and performed and taught. When I was 5 years old, I'd already been having a series of like UFO dreams. And I didn't know what UFOs were, but I just kept seeing these cylindrical craft at night, and then I'd wake up and feel a sense of longing to go back to that place where they were. After this persisted for a number of years, in my very early childhood, I had this experience where I floated out of my body, and I found myself hovering over my own body, which still appeared to be breathing normally in bed. And that was highly unique, because up until then, I didn't really have any proof that there might be this hierarchical nature to one's own self. But when you can exist in two places at once, that's a pretty trippy thing to happen. And I started to float down the stairs, and then as I went down the stairwell, I felt like I might be going somewhere, that maybe I wasn't coming back, and maybe this was the death process. And at that point I got really scared, and I shot back into my body very abruptly. And it was after this that I realized that I probably missed out on something very cool by being afraid. And so I did not want to have that fear repeat itself again. So as a result of that initial impulse, within 2 years, I had not had another out-of-body experience, but I very much wanted to have one. So I asked my mother about it, and she said, well, this is one of the things called ESP, extrasensory perception, and there's books you can read about it in the basement. Well, sure enough, under the basement stairs, there was a bunch of books, and I found one that had ESP on the spine. It was written by a guy named Harold Sherman. And I was just so taken with it. I mean, I was 7 years old, but I had the verbal ability to be able to get through this book. Barely. I mean, I had to fudge my way through a lot of it. I didn't understand everything, but I was really surprised that this author was talking about ESP and psychic phenomena as if it was something he had to defend, as if it wasn't something everybody had. Because for me, it wasn't difficult to be psychic. It wasn't anything challenging. I could see people's emotions long before they manifested as a physical event that you could observe with their facial expression and their tone of voice. I would sense these things coming. I would know when my parents were coming home before they got home. When I was sitting with the babysitter. You know, there was just any number of psychic things happening. So I started to practice these exercises in the book, and I was really disappointed when the guy says, the younger you are when you start this, the more psychic you'll be. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, I'm already 7 years old. I've been 5 years. That is a true story. So then, I went through a period of great disillusionment. I was reading Stephen King horror books and so forth as my family got more and more unbalanced, and my parents ended up divorcing. I kind of got into a period for a while. It was dark. But I did continue to study things like palm reading. I had a deck of tarot cards that my mother had, which I was using. I studied any number of different esoteric subjects, read tons of books. And by the time I was in high school, I was able to consciously induce lucid dreams. This means going to bed at night, lying there and saying, next time I'm dreaming, I want to remember to recognize that I'm dreaming. Next time I'm dreaming, I want to remember to recognize that I'm dreaming. And you repeat that to yourself like a mantra. And you also visualize the dream that you just woke up from. And you replay the dream in your mind, except this time you imagine that you're seeing something change and you recognize that you're in a dream. So you rewrite the dream in your imagination. Well, how would you do that? Let's say, for example, that I'm standing up here right now and I'm talking to you guys. And I look over here, and there's that picture on the wall. And then I look away, and then I turn back and I look again, except now there's a doorway there. That's perfectly natural in a dream. In fact, if you look at anything in a dream, and then you look away and then you look back, it will have to change. It will not stay the same. And that is a way that you can absolutely definitively prove that you are dreaming. So let's just have a practice exercise right now. Look at me, then look away, now look back. If anything's different, then that means you're dreaming. So actually, that's the best way to do it. If you can rehearse this while you are having a conscious experience like this right now. Because ultimately, it is all a dream, right? I mean, that's what we know from all these esoteric teachings, is that we are actually slipping between the cracks of reality all the time. We are not stuck in this one particular modality. The body is like a pair of shoes that we put on when we get up in the morning. When we go to bed at night, we take the shoes off and we leave them next to the bed. But our awareness goes somewhere else. In a near-death experience, you are legally brain dead. Your brain is not chunking out any electromagnetic signals, which would be the indication that you were alive and that your brain was functioning and that your mind was functioning. But people have gone out of their body. They continue to have a conscious awareness. They continue to be able to think and function. Their brain is dead. They come back to the body reanimates, and the brain goes back online. Does this mean that the brain could be the seat of the mind? Because could we prove that the brain is the seat of the mind if we include that piece of data? Absolutely not. That proves that the mind, that what you're actually using right now as I'm talking, what you're using to process the words that I'm saying, cannot be the brain. There is a function, a part of your conscious awareness that we could call online, which is the part of you that is thinking in the intellect, that makes deductive conclusions and reasoning. There's also other parts of your body that are very important to understand, which are sort of offline, local. There's a non-local and there's a local. There's an online and an offline. Offline includes things like the emotional body, okay? If you have a certain particular emotion like happiness, you need certain chemicals to be secreted by the body in order for that emotion to be felt authentically, and I'm sure there are some healing practitioners here who are well aware of this. If you don't have serotonin, endorphins, neuroenkephalins, and these various compounds, oxytocin being another one, then you can have experiences that will appear to be happy experiences, but you won't have an emotional reaction to them because you don't have the chemical messengers in your brain to let you have that experience. That's what happened to me. I got involved in marijuana, and that was part of my exploration of all the various realms of consciousness. I wanted to figure out where can I go and how do I get my boarding pass. So I watched this thing about the Beatles, and they said, "Lucy in the sky." Yeah. Like, LSD, all right, here, we'll do it. Marijuana, sure. I didn't do coke, I didn't do heroin. My parents were hippies. They're like, "Oh, that stuff will kill you." But I had my acid, I had my marijuana, I did mushrooms, I did yellow hospital microdots, I did mescaline, psilocybin, all these different things. And I've tripped about 22 times, and I discovered that I could go to a place where it appeared that I was the only one who was alive, because you start to conclude that no one else has lived because they have not experienced this awareness that you go into. You feel as if you're walking around a bunch of mindless zombies. And I'd had that kind of an experience before, but when you're a college student and you're tripping and you're standing next to somebody who's drunk and he's trying to have a conversation with you, hey, you know, that girl over there. You're like, oh man, because in the amount of time that somebody can say one sentence, you can have like 13 different thoughts, at least. In fact, there was one time when I was looking at the clock and it said 3:33 actually, and it didn't change, and I got really paranoid that I was dead. And 500 different thoughts go through my mind. Oh my God, I'm dying, I'm dying. Then when the clock finally changed to 3:34, oh, I was so relieved. It was like, thank you, God, thank you so much. So, yeah, I've explored the outer reaches of consciousness, and I've done it with a very stoned smile on my face. But ultimately, I discovered that marijuana is what I call the 5-leaf lesson. Those 5 leaves wrap around you and they grab you tight and they don't let go. You go a certain way and then you can't make any further progress. That's what I discovered. It was like I hit a glass ceiling of some kind and I couldn't go past it. So I got sober in 1992, and the way that I got sober was realizing that I no longer had the chemical ability to feel happiness. In other words, all those chemicals that make you happy didn't exist for me anymore because I was forcing them to be released with drugs. So in the wake of that, I found this article in a scientific magazine that showed me, okay, this is what's going on. My body's in a diminishing returns. It will not release happiness chemicals unless I actually am happy, which means I have to have the chemicals. So I can't have the emotion without the chemicals, and I'm destroying the chemicals by the drug use. Now, it is true that a lot of the things that you've heard tonight can help this process. I know for one thing for sure is that nutrition, super green powder, juices, all that kind of stuff is very good to help rebuild this natural supply that you have. And also, there's a lot of information that shows that people who do have hands-on healing ability and who are healing practitioners, massotherapy, whatever, that those healing modalities very much can help to rebuild your body's natural supply of happiness. It was only years later that I discovered that over and above this chemical system that allows you to have a certain degree of thought and feeling, that there is this intellect that runs on an energy field which is outside the body. And that's what my film is about, called Convergence the Movie. I've been working on this film for 3 years here in LA, and I am currently the executive producer. We've raised $250,000 for the film already, and we are just now finishing the screenplay. In fact, I was tweaking the script before I got here. I got here to beat the 405 traffic, so I've been here. I was here 3 hours before we started. So anyway, just to kind of not diverge that much from the storyline, just for the few of you who don't know about this, things got really, really strange right after I quit using drugs. What do I mean by that? Well, about 6 months after I quit using drugs, a very good friend of mine walks into my room and his face is white as a sheet of paper, and he says, I just had a 2-hour discussion with my physics professor. Big deal. It's physics. Who cares about physics? He says, well, I don't know how to say this, man, but aliens are real. Whatever, dude. No, I'm serious. This is crazy. You know, this guy, Roswell crash. Roswell, oh, here we go. Anyway, what he started to explain to me was so richly detailed and technical and had so many specifics that I became convinced that this professor who had worked in the higher echelons of NASA through the 1970s was in fact telling him the truth. And he was just regurgitating everything that he just heard to me. So he was saying, for example, that the ships had crashed, Roswell being one of the first ones, that our NASA guys and other military people were able to get inside the craft, and it was perfectly round inside with kind of like a desktop, but there was no buttons or levers or switches on it. It was all just a flat white panel. And you could put your hand over certain parts and they'd light up. Well, I'd had that in my dreams already. Then what they did is they kind of leaned down and they got underneath the panel, and they found that there was this big circular panel underneath that you could pop off. And it was like a big cylinder that went all the way around the inside. Now they naturally assumed, they were very excited when they found this, and they said, well, we're going to find wires and components and little gadgets and all this kind of stuff in there. They pop the panel off and they look inside, and all there is another panel. This kind of off-white ceramic. And that's it. And they found fiber optic cables that were burnt, just the edges of the fiber optics. They didn't know what those were. It just looked like little pieces of glass at the time. They had no idea what that was. They found this little thing that was Velcroed to the wall. Velcro came from the ships, apparently. They pop it off, and then this laser shot through like 15 walls of the military base. It was an incredibly powerful burning laser. They had never seen a laser before. You know, laser is light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. It was a technology they developed from the ship. So there were all these technologies that they were able to find. Well, it took years to figure out what's on the inside of that panel. What's that white ceramic stuff? Somebody finally got the bright idea, hey, let's look at it with a microscope. So they looked at it with a microscope and they saw all these tiny little lines going vertical and horizontal. It was a gigantic computer chip. And it was a gigantic computer chip etched on a piece of superconducting ceramic, meaning that there's no loss of electrical current when it goes through. Well, big deal, right? Well, part of it is, look at how hot your computer gets from the CPU running, which is just this little postage stamp-sized computer chip. Now imagine a computer chip that's big enough to run the entire wall, the inside of that ship. And think about how we now can get 8 gigabytes of memory on a little bitty keychain drive, right? Now imagine one of those, but then expanded to the size of the entire inner panel of this ship. Okay, think about that. And it doesn't generate any heat because it's superconducting. So this is some of the stuff that was being given to me in this rapid-fire download of information. It just blew me away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And he also described a propulsion system in the ship where it shot out a little particle of radiation going 3/4 the speed of light. Then a second particle would go out at the speed of light and hit the first one like this. And it would bounce off of it, and it would bounce off of it like that, and then hit the rim of the ship, which was a saucer, so it could go in any direction. And that would very rapidly accelerate the ship to near light speed velocity. So that's how they were doing it. It was like a virtual laser set up in space, like a series of pool balls bouncing off each other like billiard style. So that's how it was done. This NASA contact said that there were 3 types of beings they found in the ships. The tallest ones looked just like us. Just like us. There were only very slight physiological differences. For one thing, the irises were purple. Okay? And there was a slight diamond shape to the pupil. It wasn't really fully round. It kind of had a little bit of a squaring off to it. It wasn't like a reptilian, but it was a little bit square. And that'd be a pretty interesting character to meet, wouldn't it? You could make some contact lenses like that and sell them. That'd be another business idea. So they also found out that there was a middle height one which kind of had the big eyes, right? And that's the one we all know is like the gray. And then there was a shorter one that had what looked like the gray head, but then that was a helmet. And then when you took the helmet off, underneath was what they referred to as a monstrosity. Well, it took years to figure out that the monstrosity was a human life form that has evolved from a reptilian genetic stock. That doesn't mean that they're bad guys, okay? We don't want to be interstellar racists here. Just because you evolved from a reptile into a human being does not mean that you are some killing machine. Doesn't mean that you're not, but it doesn't mean that you are. Similarly, you know, I believe that there's good and bad ETs, just like there's good and bad people. But then again, we're all part of this one infinite cosmos, and in the esoteric teaching that I eventually turned on to, we all are going to the same place. We're all returning to source. This whole universe was a thought form that was created by a one infinite creator, which got pretty lonely and bored, having everything always so perfect and wonderful. There was no story, there was no drama. So it decided to fragment itself into all these different trillions and trillions of pieces, apparent separate pieces, each of whom had their own free will. That was the most important part. God says to you, hey, you go out and you do whatever you want. But eventually, because you are me and you're not anything else, you're going to come back. But what I like is the idea that you're going to go out and find your own way to do it. So the whole idea of like an organized religion that's going to thump the Bible and say, boom, this is the word, this is the way it goes, this is what you have to do, that's not the way the universe was created. The universe intends for us to each find our own unique path. So if the things that I'm telling you tonight give you tools that you can put into your tool chest that are going to help you to be able to foster your own worldview and create your own way of seeing things, that's what I want. I don't like the word followers. I don't want to cultivate any type of dependency on anyone where they feel like they need to hear something from me or else it's not the truth. Because every person has gifts and insights and treasures that cannot be duplicated by anyone else. We all have that divine spark. And each time that the Creator has incarnated in a particular human person, that is a treasure that is beyond all imagination. Each one of you here tonight is precious beyond imagination. And that absolutely cannot be denied or taken from you. It is your divine heritage, it is your birthright as a soul incarnate in this physical form. And I adamantly believe in that, and I believe also that no matter how far somebody has strayed from their own enlightened consciousness, that we don't hold them in contempt, we don't hold them in shame or in any type of negative emotion, because the Creator has allowed for the opportunity to choose how you're going to serve the creation. And one of the ways you can serve is the negative path, which is manipulation, control, and enslavement of others for the benefit of the self. Now, if you do that, you're essentially skirting the system of karma, which will necessitate that whatever you measure out to others is going to be measured back to you. So if you want to look at these people out there in the public eye, let me just give you one example, which is very interesting. Think about how it must have felt for Vice President Al Gore. 2000 election is ripped out from under him, right? And we're now in the same situation again, right? Hanging chads, dimpled chads, the vote count. We don't even want to think about this. Oh, God, why did you even mention that, dude? But think about what it would be like if you're the guy who thinks that he's going to be president because you actually won. Right? And then you don't win. And you get blown out by the Supreme Court. Think about what that means. Now, I don't have the slide here. If I was indulgent enough, I'd take the time to go find the other presentation that has it, but I'm not going to do that. You put Al Gore and King Henry VIII from England side by side, and it's almost identical. The facial similarity is so striking that everybody in the room would gasp if I had the slide up here right now. King Henry VIII, if he got tired of having sex with a woman, his wife, he'd just have her killed. That was his gig. That was what he did. And there's this whole weird history in England about rationalizing why King Henry was killing off his wives, and he'd kind of set them up and make like, try to make it look like it was an accident or, whatever. But sometimes he'd just have them, guillotined. And he went through seven, wasn't it 7 wives? Because there's that Rick Wakeman, the guy from Yes, had that progressive rock album, The 7 Wives of Henry VIII. It's a really cool album if you haven't heard it. But anyway, I'm a drummer also, a professional jazz drummer, so I have the rhythm. So wow, I'm going off on a crazy tangent here, but are you guys having fun? Is everybody enjoying what I'm saying? Okay, cool. All right, so let's see, loop back around, curly Q, okay. So I hear about all this UFO stuff, and I'm going, my God, I mean, for 2 weeks, everything I thought of was UFOs. No matter where I went, no matter what I thought, I just couldn't get it out of my mind. Because I'd had a lot of things in my life where I was thinking about UFOs, but always in sort of like a, oh, this isn't really true. Once I realized that the higher echelons of NASA are keeping this a secret from the people, and the guy even said, the professor said, hey, we don't mind if you tell people. We just don't want it to go on the front page of the New York Times. We always need plausible deniability. So if you tell people that I told you this, I'm going to tell them that I didn't. I'm going to deny it. So we want everybody to know, but we just want to leave the option where they can either believe it or not believe it so that we don't have social decay and collapse. And what they used as an example was the War of the Worlds broadcast, which I think is really unfair. Because that's basically saying that there are rogue, hostile aliens invading, and it came through the medium, which is how everybody was finding out what was going on in the world, which was radio. And it was done in a very convincing manner to make everybody think it was real. Now that's a big difference from just saying, okay, look, there's ethical ETs that have been coming here for tens of thousands of years, documented in every ancient culture that talks about gods. And they've never done anything to hurt us. There's no solid evidence of there being an incineration of an entire people or any type of major disaster like that. So, again, you don't really need to believe in ETs or not to get the thrust of what I'm going to be talking about tonight, but I'm just saying that for me as a person, this is how I got into all this stuff. This is what kind of triggered me into my esoteric studies. So I started to read lots and lots of books. I read 300 books in the period of the next 3 years. I'd have 5 of them going once, and I'd finish, 2 or 3 a week in many cases. At the end of this 3 years, I'm going, what the heck am I doing? Why am I doing all this stuff? This is crazy. I'm just consuming these books, and I can't stop reading no matter what. And I was having the dreams, obviously. The same time that I got sober, I started to write my dreams down every morning. That's been going on for 14, 15 years. So the dreams started to imply that the force behind the UFO phenomenon wanted to make a physical contact with me in some way. That it actually wanted to reach out to me and make communication happen. Well, it's one thing to be reading about something in books. It's quite another when it knocks on the door and says, hey, how would you like to answer the phone tonight? How would you like to experience contact? Well, I actually did go through a period of extreme terror. I did not want to have some hollow alien thing show up in my room with these big funny eyes and oh my God, I just the thoughts. I don't want to. Then I had this dream, and it says, no, that's not how it works. We're going to come into your dream, or when you're just waking up, and we're going to talk to you. You'll be able to hear the words, and then you just dictate the words into your tape recorder. No, that sounds cool. All right. So it took months for this to work, but eventually I woke up in the morning and I just started to listen to the background noise that you can hear when you're first waking up. It's kind of like the imagination, except that it just bubbles up and it doesn't require any effort. It just automatically manifests in your mind. You don't have to do anything. It's just there. And you actually can train yourself. Now this is the key. Remember I was telling you that some of your thoughts come from the body, which is the offline, and some of the thoughts come from the online. Your conscious mind is constantly weaving together offline and online information. All right? The reason why we always are saying in the esoteric circles that you want to raise your kundalini and get out of the lower chakras is that when your lower chakras are really active, that means that you're in a state of distraction. That means that your emotions and your compulsions are chasing themselves around like a dog chasing its own tail in your mind. That can very effectively tie you up in offline consciousness. The more you can meditate and slow down that churning monkey mind so that it doesn't have as much of a screeching power over how you think and feel, the more that the online thoughts come in. You can get to the point where you're having pure online thoughts and no offline thoughts except for a very reduced subset, which you can maintain by focusing on your heart rate and your breathing. You just basically get yourself in a deep state of meditation where your job, the monkey mind's job, is just to keep breathing, to count the breaths, and to count the heartbeat. And just keep that going. And like Buddha said, it doesn't matter, there's no special exercise, just be aware that you're having a breath or that you're not having a breath. So you give the physical body a job to do, and the other job that it has to do is just to listen to the imagination and record everything that it says as diligently and as cleanly and clearly as possible, regardless of whether it makes any sense or not. In fact, you want to embrace the data that doesn't make sense. The biggest mistake that we all make as budding psychic practitioners is that we want clear, sensible information. That's not how it works. I'm sorry to explain this to you, but you don't get a silver platter of information from your psyche. You get a bunch of scattershot pieces of data, fleeting visual images that disappear before you even start to see them. You get sentence fragments where you don't hear the beginning of the sentence and you don't hear the end of the sentence. You just hear part of it as it's halfway along. And you're just lying there and you're meditating, and all these thoughts just bubble up. They don't require any effort, but they're just there. That is your pure online thought feed. It is part of your mind all the time. It's how, for example, my two buddies over here ended up right behind me when I was pulling into the driveway to get to this hotel 3 hours before I was supposed to speak, having left their house at exactly
2:22.
2:22, and getting here at exactly
3:33.
3:33. This is called synchronicity, and if you haven't had it happen, it's pretty amazing when it starts to happen. You can tell the clock that if it gives you 3 digits that are repeating, or 11, 11, or 12, 12, that you will take that as a symbol that whatever you were thinking or doing right before you see those numbers is important, that it has some sort of spiritual, special meaning for you. All right, that's an important thing to use. It's a form of divination. It allows you to go through your life and be able to get symbolic messages from your higher self, which is a part of you millions of years more evolved, that goes back in time to tell you how to spiritually get from point A to point B. As I was saying before, some of you might have heard me say this, there's a sequence of things that you need to learn to get from where you are now to your fully enlightened state. But like in a folding accordion, you can compress how long it takes to get from one point to another by listening to your higher self and gaining that access so that you can breach through the boundary of the conscious mind and access your higher mind. So as I'm saying, the reason why all these ancient masters so stress meditation is because it's in meditation that you shut down the offline signal and you go into the online signal. Now, it takes a lot of work to go into that online signal and start to have it actually be something that makes sense to you. In the beginning, it's just a bunch of junk. That's okay. Record everything, throw away nothing. That's what remote viewers are trained to do. Remote viewing is a technology that was developed by the Defense Department, the CIA, in which people were tasked with 2 random numbers that would then lead to a particular location of military or intelligence value. Those people did not know what the numbers responded to. All they knew was that they had to target those numbers psychically and try to draw a picture of what they were seeing. And what they found was that people were able to get above 90% accuracy to describe in exact detail what those targets were, where they were, and this worked outside of time as well. So this stuff is real. Now, the biggest thing that if you look at these remote viewing books on how to do it, is to not analyze your data, take everything that comes in, don't have an emotional reaction to your data. So here's the other problem everybody makes. They want to understand what's coming in as it comes in. That's a big no-no. Don't pay any attention to it. All you care about is that you record it, that you get it down. You do not want to try to make any sense out of it. If you start following along, and you start saying, oh, I know where this is going, this is cool, it's talking about da-da-da-da, you're done. Just stop. Get back to the point where you don't care. It's called divine indifference. You can be meditating while you're working on someone, giving them a massage. You might get a sudden visual image flashing into your mind. You don't know what it is. You don't know why you had it. Just tell the person what you saw. You don't have to explain, and if they don't understand it either, then, okay, well, I just wanted to get it out there. You don't set up the expectation that they have to know, that you have to know that it means something. You just tell them the data. And what you'll find, which is so phenomenal, is that you're going to get psychic hits over and over and over again. And this can happen to ordinary people. One of the exercises that does work for this, which you can do in a seminar or whatever, we don't have time to do it tonight, is you have someone sit across from you and hold a particular problem in their mind. And they don't tell you anything about it. And then you tell them a story. And you just invent the story from your imagination. And they're going to start crying because your story is going to hit their problem exactly. The more you tell the story, the more you engage your creativity. When you have creative thoughts, when you engage your imagination, that's online thinking. You get out of the... Storytelling gets you right out of the monkey mind, gets you right into the online mind. Your story will relate to what those people's issue is. It's automatic. It will work. So we all have the potential to be psychic, but you have to get comfortable with going into the data stream. Okay? And that means repetition. The more you meditate, the more you experience pure online thinking, the easier it is to bring data back from it. In the beginning, you're not going to want to bring anything at all. You're going to be so tired when you finally get to that place that the idea of speaking or writing is way outside of your conscious mind. And that's okay. It'll happen when you're falling asleep at first and when you're waking up in the morning. Don't wake up right away. Let yourself wake up slowly. Don't wake up to an alarm if you can. Like on a weekend, don't set the alarm. Let yourself wake up really slowly and just experience this flow of thought forms as they go through your mind. Now, in my particular case, what happened is I started to do this. I started to take documentation. And the source turned out to be something that identified itself and gave me all this information, cosmic information, spiritual teaching. It started to predict the future. The futures were being predicted very accurately. And there are any number of stories, and I don't need to go into a lot of detail about it because you can read it all on my website, divinecosmos.com. Suffice it to say that there are many, many fascinating stories. I'll give you one which a lot of you have probably already heard, but this was just over the top. It was so fantastic. I did a reading. The first person I ever did a reading for was my housemate Eric. And it just wanted to say some things about him, so I let it do what it wanted because I don't get in the way. Well, Eric had graduated from New Paltz and was now going to Albany. These are State University New York schools. They're called SUNY schools, right? He was no longer a student in New Paltz. He graduated. Well, I'm getting this reading for Eric, and I hear the sentence that says, "You'll be happy to know that your student loans for New Paltz have come in." He already graduated New Paltz, so I even demanded that the sentence be rephrased because I thought it had to be inaccurate. So it said, "You'll be happy to know your student loans have come in. You should visit New Paltz." Okay, I'll take that one. But I certainly remember what the first one was. Well, you know, he got the reading, he read it, oh, whatever, that doesn't mean anything. A month later, he comes in the house and he says, "Man, you got to sit down for this. This is going to drive you crazy." Okay. Well. My mother just got a call from the bursar's office at New Paltz. They were moving the bursar's office from one room to another. They were almost done. They pulled a file cabinet away from the wall, and there was an envelope behind the file cabinet. Inside the envelope was an uncashed Stafford loan check, which is still good, made out to me for $900. We needed $876 to be able to stay in our apartment. Now, this is one of many, many examples of how this was working. So, I got sold down the river by my higher self. I got lured in. I got to the point that I trusted the guidance. I relied on this. I was having daily communication. And about a little over a year after this happened, people started to recognize that I looked just like this famous psychic from the early 20th century, Edgar Cayce. Oh man. So I wasn't too hip on this. Then I had been guided by my source to move to Virginia Beach, which is where Edgar Cayce set up his foundation called the ARE. I got down there totally as a result of my guidance, and everybody started to recognize me as a spitting image of Edgar Cayce when he was my age. Years later, we put a book together about it, and this is the book. I do have, I guess, 20 copies of it here. They are available for sale. They're $25 as a conference fee because it's the cost of me coming out here. It's a little bit more than retail, just not much. And I'll sign them for you and personalize them. And I know I have more people that probably want one than I have books, but you can just claw each other's eyes out and rip the flesh. We'll figure out how to get this done. Anyway, drum roll, please. Here's the comparison photo. And if you haven't seen this before, it's like, darn, there it is. I mean, you notice the eyes, of course, there's a lot of similarity there. The earlobes are a little bit fleshier on his than on mine. But check out the jaw, the little dimple there. Okay, the shape of the chin. Check out the shape of the lips. Okay. In fact, my orthodontist, because I had a lot of work done on my teeth to get them straight, my orthodontist said that these guys actually have exactly the same orthodontic profile. The way this tooth protrudes is the same thing in this mouth here. The brow, which you can't really see too well, there's other pictures from the side profile is very, very similar. So this was not exactly something that I appreciated. When I finally asked my source to give me a solid answer as to what was going on here, and I got the answer in the affirmative, my response was nausea. I actually almost threw up. And then as I started to investigate further, I started to realize that there were other people from Cayce's life who were very similar to people in my life, such as my brother. This is Dr. Wesley Ketchum, who was the first person to mainstream Cayce's work. You notice the similarity. Now, I know some of you have seen this on the video. We're not going to go through a whole lot of this old material. We did not get him to have a different pair of glasses. This is the way he actually decided to dress. This is my father after a Metallica concert. That's why he's sneering. He would kill me if he knows I'm using this picture. And he actually did get really angry at me about not using this picture, but I don't have any other one that shows it. So until he wants to throw down and give me another photograph. This is what we got. This is Edgar Cayce's father, right? Same guy. Now here's what's even weirder. Cayce's father, everybody called him the Squire. The whole entire time my father grew up, he would never buy any men's clothing except at one store called the Squire Shop. See, this is where the followers can chime in. All right, now this is my friend Jude. We did a sequence of music together. He actually was composing music when I was like a 9th grader. He had this music he called organized noise, which is not too far from what it sounded like. But you know, we got together and our first band was actually called the Sewer Rats. It was highly vulgar music. I hope that every single copy of that tape has been forever deleted from the public record. I know that I don't have mine anymore. We were a little bit perturbed by the PMRC, Parents Music Resource Center, and they were trying to censor music lyrics, so we had one song that was called F-U PMRC, and we bragged about the fact that we said the F word 86 times in one song, because we had it on a sampler. You know, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, this was real high-minded compositional material here, but it turns out that he's a spitting image of this very important figure. Let me see if I can get this little guy. Okay, let's go there. Come on, buddy. This is Edwin Blumenthal, who was one of Edgar Cayce's main financiers. And the reading said that Edwin had the ability to go as far into the spiritual realms as Edgar did. Now here's a really strange story. One night we were composing music in Schenectady, New York, which is where Jude had an apartment at the time. And I was crashed out on the air mattress, which we called the suka suka, because it, you know, when you blow it up. So I was sleeping on the suka suka, he was up on his bed. And I'm lying there basically falling asleep. This is before I started to do the readings. And I have this dream where there's this big heavy guy chasing after me. And he's gonna kill me. And I have this handgun down in my pants like this. And it's not a phallic reference. Thank you for asking. I had this handgun down in my pants, and I knew I could grab it and turn around and shoot him, and eliminate the problem of him coming after me. But for some reason, I didn't want to shoot him. I didn't want to commit an act of violence. Jude, up in his bed, starts tossing and turning and goes, "Shoot him! Just shoot him! 2 bullets!" And I just woke up and I'm staring at the ceiling like, oh my God. But I said, man, if I wake him up and tell him this, we are going to be up all night. I'm never going to get any sleep. So I actually had the patience to wait until the morning to tell him this. This is my friend Christopher from school. I would write term papers for him, and then he'd turn them in as if he wrote them. And that was our little kind of sneaky business that we had. He loved my writing. Morton Blumenthal booked more Cayce readings than anybody else. There's over 900 paid client readings for Morton. No one else has anywhere near that many. Well, it was really ironic that Morton is doing these, booking Cayce's services to write for him, to write the readings for him. Chris was the first person to pay me for doing any writing in this lifetime. Repeatedly, I wrote his term papers for him. And if I didn't, he got pretty pissed. Now this is another friend of mine, Angelica, who I met in college. I had an immediate connection to her when I first met her. I did happen to find this picture of her where she was not smiling, so you really get the similarity here. This is Edgar Cayce's wife, Gertrude. Now what was so fascinating was, after I graduated college, I was taking a train out to Boulder, Colorado to try to study at a university called Naropa, which is a meditation school. And on the way back, when it turned out that I hadn't gotten accepted, I met these 2 guys who were on the way to this ashram for Baba Muktananda, who's this enlightened teacher. Well, they were all excited. They told me all about it. It was in South Fallsburg, New York. I got really excited. I wanted to go there too. Days later, when I got back to New York, and then it was a couple weeks later, but I soon moved back to New Paltz from my mother's house, ran into Angelica, told her this story. She goes, oh my God, I grew up in Baba Muktananda's ashram in South Fallsburg, New York. So this kind of synchronicity was happening with her. So that's kind of the end of the expository material. Where we're going to bridge into now is some of the stuff that I'm doing in this film trilogy, Convergence. Now this is just a preliminary graphic. This is probably not the one we're going to end up using. What I've since discovered is that you can take all of this esoteric material that's out there on the web. Most people say they're channeling it. What do they keep talking about? They talk about things like 2012, higher consciousness, new forms of matter and energy. And it's all very fluffy, it's all very kind of like, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. And I'm not denying the value of intuitively derived data, okay, because I do it, and I find it useful. But if you notice, if you start digging into channeling, that there's many, many divergent paths of ways that you can hear about things, and they're not all the same, and in fact, they're very different. And it becomes a totally subjective guess as to whether something is true or not. It's just a question of whether you're convinced. But one source is going to say one thing, another source is going to say something else. So as my own relationship with my source developed, I became acquainted with other sources of data that I found to be highly credible, mainly this source called the Law of One series, which was a series of 5 books channeled in the early 1980s by a group of 3 people called L&L Research. That was the group's name. And this was the first time that work like Edgar Cayce's had been done again, in which the channel was completely unconscious, had no knowledge of what was being said while it was going on. And the data was of such high quality. By this point, I'd read well over 300 books, and I dig into this Law of One stuff, and everything I'd read was in there. All these things that I thought I had discovered that were my own private, unique little discoveries, they're all in there. And then there was much more in there than I could have ever even done on my own. So it's taken a long time to get to the point where we're ready to do a film about this stuff, because a lot of the Law of One stuff is very esoteric and highly philosophical, cannot be proven one way or the other. But there's also a great deal of science in there that is provable. It's either true or it's not true. You're given a piece of data. If it says this weighs half a pound, well, obviously it doesn't, but you can prove that that's not true. You can weigh it. This is the kind of data I'm talking about. Either it's true or it's not true. Well, there's a lot of stuff in this material that says something is true, and you can go and study it and find out if it's right. So, when we're dealing with the idea of 2012, this Law of One material is basically explaining to us that our planet is going through a massive shift. It's a shift in consciousness. It's a shift in a greater sense of evolution. In other words, the abilities that I'm describing, that I'm doing myself, are not unique to me. They are simply something that we all have in potential. I just happen to be sitting down at the piano and practicing every day so I can play a symphony after a while. You can do the same thing. Many of you probably already are. But if 2012, if there's some energetic change that's so fantastic that it involves literally the creation of a light body, in other words, this biblical rapture being a very bastardized, crude form of something that actually is true, if we're going to give credence to the idea that Jesus was a master teacher, why would we discard that major aspect of some of the things he was saying as being bullshit, right? It obviously is not. There's obviously some truth to it, or else he wouldn't have said it. And you can clearly establish in the book of Daniel, the book of Isaiah, various texts in the Bible saying, in the twinkling of an eye, we shall all be changed. We shall not sleep. We shall, you know, the new Adam, the new race. There's all this stuff in the Bible. Well, okay, the sun is a pretty gigantic object. Actually, all the planets put together, their mass, the sun is 99.86% of all that mass. So these are like little tiny specks of sand. They're nothing compared to the size of the sun. This is too big for the whole room to fit in, by comparison. Now, a lot of people don't realize that when you typically see the planets, the sun is just a little bit bigger in the diagram. That's not the way it works. So, if the sun is going through some sort of energetic change, it makes a lot of sense that it could affect all the planets. And in the video, I kind of set up this point, but I don't actually go through the data. Tonight, we're about to go through that data. So, why am I telling you this? Because if there is something that is energetically changing the planets at a very rapid speed, we are on the planets, right? So, whatever is changing the planets is going to be changing us. We are part of that energy field that's being transformed. Now, solar activity has reached a peak that we haven't seen in over 8,000 years. This is around the fall of Atlantis time in the historical, arcane tradition. Well, check it out. It's skyrocketing. This is the amount of activity that's coming out of the sun. 8,000 years is a very long time, and there's a big spike. The planet Mercury, this is brand new. We didn't have anything on Mercury before. NASA just came out with something a couple months ago. The magnetic field of Mercury was different than it was in the 70s. The magnetic field was generally quiet, but it showed several signatures indicating significant pressure. That wasn't there before. In other words, Mercury is growing a magnetic field that it didn't have before. Is everybody with me? Am I going too fast for anybody? Good. Venus had a 2,500% increase in the green glow right here. And if you look at this carefully, you can see that it's actually the shape of a triangle inside the planet. And that's not an accident. That gets into this geometry we're going to look at later. Okay? That's in a very short period of time, less than 20 years, this massive increase in green. And that's basically oxygen. That's coming from the sun. The sun is spewing out these charged particles, which is then heating up the atmosphere. Now on Mars, you're seeing the appearance of clouds. You can notice the change in clouds right there. Mars didn't used to have clouds at all. Okay, this is brand new stuff. And ozone, that's also new. Mars ice caps are eroding and melting. Look at this. You see that chunk right there? And you see how much smaller it is over here? This is within 1 year, over 50% of the ice features are disappearing. That's very substantial. That is called global warming on Mars. That is actually referred to by NASA as global warming. There's no SUVs on Mars. That's the problem. Okay? Now, Jupiter did not have this tube. It didn't even exist prior to 1974. It wasn't there. All of a sudden, because the sun is spewing out all these new particles and stuff, the magnetic field, this is just a belt of the magnetic field basically, starts capturing all these particles, and when you blot out the planet, you can start to see it. Well, it's not just, it didn't just show up, it's growing, okay? Now this is what you're about to see is an animation that shows at a very fast speed how this tube kind of tilts like a saucer as the planet is, you know, as the moon Io is going around. This is the orbit of Io right here, and you can see how the tube is being tugged by the magnetic field. This plasma torus has gotten 200% thicker in just basically 15 years. That's huge, okay? And in typical understated NASA fashion, stronger than expected. All right. The actual density of each particle, each one of these millions and millions, billions of particles, each one of them is 50% thicker in 15 years. It exceeded our expectations. Got it. Jupiter's white ovals in 97 September, there's 3 of them. Look at what happens by September 2000, just 3 years later. Boom, there's only 1. They're disappearing. Well, this is where the heat comes out. What happens if you cut off the way for the heat to get out? The planet's going to heat up. So this guy, Dr. Philip Marcus, says that Jupiter's going to experience an 18-degree global warming in the next 10 years. And that was back in 97. Think about what would happen if we had an 18-degree global warming on Earth. We're done. It's over. Io, that little moon that was pulling that tube around, check this out. This is what's called the ionosphere. That's the charged particles again. It's gotten 1,000% higher. In other words, it used to only be about this high, and now look at it. It's way, way up there. So this thing has gotten huge. Unexpected. Okay. Very well. The surface of the entire moon. Now this means every single square mile of the surface has gotten over twice as hot. The entire surface. That's not anywhere near the sun. Well, we are surprised, and we cannot explain. 3 times hotter than the surface of Mercury. Mercury is supposed to be close to the sun. Where the heck is the heat coming from if it's not coming from visible sunlight? Where is it coming from? It's coming from this new energy. It's not an electromagnetic energy source. Europa, much brighter than expected. Check this out. This is the prediction based on what they had seen in the satellite photos from before. This is what it was supposed to look like when they looked at it in 2003. Then they shot the Hubble Space Telescope, some images of it. This is how much brightness there actually was. Much brighter than expected. At least that time they're starting to be a little honest. This is in a book called Jupiter, which you can order online. All this stuff is very easily documented. Ganymede is another moon of Jupiter, 200% brighter in 15 years. This spot right here, 700% brighter. And again, you know, they don't even try to explain this stuff. The density, the thickness of Ganymede is 1,000% more. You're starting to get the picture. Saturn, Saturn is way down in here. Check this big guy out. That's the plasma torus of Saturn. You can see there's other smaller ones in here, but this is the real big one. This torus has gotten 1,000% thicker in that same time frame, 12-year time frame. That's very substantial. These bright spots are growing on the bottom of the planet and the top of the planet. That wasn't there before. Saturn has massive X-rays coming out from near the equator. That wasn't there before. Now check this out. This is Uranus. This is what it actually looks like back in 1986. Notice that there's like hardly anything there. They call it featureless as a cue ball. Now what you're going to see in the next photos is actually color enhancement. So it's not as, it looks more different than it really is, but if you look at it like this, you start to see these white flecks that were not there before. But what they did is they used an artificial way to enhance the color to show the changes. Now this is awesome. Check that out. This belt is showing up that wasn't there before. These little clouds are running around. And then there's all this stuff over here that wasn't there before. And I do have an animation, I don't think it's in this presentation, that shows how they grow. They are actually saying it's really big changes hit by huge storms. Okay, now that's more honest, because this is enormous. Ground-based observations showing a seasonal brightness changes that are not well understood. Okay. Right. Now, look at all that mess. Remember, this is the same thing. Here's the original little guy here. Right? And here it is over here. You can't tell me that that's not a substantial change. Why is this not on every news program? This is our backyard. The planets are changing before our very eyes. They are growing spots. If you suddenly had spots like this on your body, you go to the doctor. Right? Another thing that I want to point out to you, if you haven't noticed it, is check out the geometry. You notice that? You notice how evenly spaced those are? Well, we're going to get into that some more. That's another really cool thing. Well, okay, Neptune. Here's what Neptune looked like in 1989, Voyager 2. There's some stuff going on. There's some bright clouds over there, but it's not too much. Again, we're going to see a false color enhanced image, but check this out, man. 1996 to 2002, this is basically 6 years. Now when you see the rot down here, it doesn't mean the planet is rotting, that's rotation. Okay, so this is 0 degrees, this is quarter, half, 3/4. This is what is happening. This is near infrared, which is just above the level that we can see. This is what the planet looks like, and then this is what it looks like averaged out in 2002. 6 years difference. That's like somebody turned on a light bulb in a lampshade. Okay? That is massive. Look at these belts. Look at this white stuff that's growing in near infrared. That's all heat. That's all changes in temperature. And down here, in the same exact spot, there's only a little tiny bit of it. It frustrates me because you can find this on websites. It's out there in the public. I happen to be the first person to put it all together. Just no applause, please. Thank you. 1989 and 2002, massive changes have happened. Now here's our little animation. Just watch and learn. You can see it growing. That is cool, isn't it? I mean, look at that. Okay, so Pluto, we know that since 1989, Pluto has been moving away from the sun. It's going farther away from the sun, which means it should be cooling down. That's what you'd think would happen. During the time that it's moving away from the sun, the atmospheric pressure has increased by 300%. Can you imagine what would happen if the atmospheric pressure on Earth increased by 300% in that time frame? There's 10 pounds of pressure on your skin per square inch, right? So think about what that would mean. It would be like we'd all be just crushed by that increase in pressure. It would be very, very uncomfortable. Well, thankfully, Pluto has a much smaller atmosphere, so much more pressure increase can happen. This is a result of the planet heating up. That's what's causing that. So what this is showing us here, let's see if I can get my hand out of the way. There we go. Is that the Earth changes are not unique to the Earth. Things are spinning up. They're getting faster and faster. Pun intended, right? That's why we got that graphic there. Now, let's look at some things on the Earth that cannot be caused by our lovely Ford and General Motors and all the other companies' SUV cars. Continuous rise in earthquake activity. If you look at just 2.5s and higher from 73 to 98, you get a 400% increase. Volcano activity from 1875 to 93, same curve. These are the same volcanoes that have been studied. There's unbroken data. Look at how much more activity they have now. This is the sea level. Notice the curve, the angle of the curve is always the same. This is the temperature on the land, same curve. This is the number of tornadoes in the US. Notice the curve. This is an overall analysis of all these different things, floods, earthquakes, droughts, tropical storms. It's all changing the same way. This is the amount of economically adjusted, right? This is actually adjusted, calibrated for economic change, the amount of economic loss from natural catastrophes. So it's getting more and more expensive. And this is the number of winter storms in the Northern Hemisphere. So the number of storms are increasing. Well, that's just like Neptune and Uranus, right? They're doing the same thing. And Mars has those clouds growing. Venus is getting brighter. Mercury is getting more of a magnetic field. Jupiter is getting that tube that's growing around the moon eye. All the moons are getting brighter. Saturn is having that big tube of energy grow. Saturn is getting brighter. Same stuff is happening on the Earth. The entire Pacific Ocean basin, these are degrees of longitude down here. This is Antarctica down here, if you're wondering what that is. This is the seafloor, okay? And what they're doing here is this is the depth, this is how deep you go. Okay, so you can see the depth, and this is the bottom of this is the base, right? And then you're looking at the temperature. Now this is what it was in 1985. The amount of red indicates how hot it is, and how far up that temperature goes in the water. And then this is what it looks like in 1999. Now that's only a few degrees difference, but based on the amount of change that's happening, it's enormous. And the same thing is happening with the salt content. This is the amount of salt in 85, and this is 99. Now guess how the scientists explain this? This makes me laugh. Well, you see, the sun is heating up the surface of the ocean because of global warming, right? And then those hotter molecules are sinking down to the bottom, and then they warm up the bottom. Well, were you in kindergarten when we learned that heat goes up and cold goes down? What the hell are they talking about? If you want to heat up a pot of water on the stove, are you going to take a hairdryer and blow the top of it? Come on, give me a break. It's really ridiculous. You put the heat on the bottom. So there's something inside the Earth that's getting hotter. So you get the point. This cannot be caused by SUVs. Here's another one. The astronauts are noticing these really bright clouds in Earth's outer atmosphere that they call noctilucent clouds. Those were not there before. Okay, that's brand new stuff. There's also this new belt that's been growing inside Earth's magnetic field. It was not there. In fact, here's a NASA diagram. Look at that word right there. What does it say? It says new belt. That's a rather disingenuous name for it, but if it's new and it's a belt, why not call it, hey, we'll call it new belt. That's cool. It showed up in 1998. And here's the interesting part. Look at what that says. Interstellar matter. That means that this is stuff that's not supposed to show up in the Earth's magnetic field at all. It's only supposed to exist between stars, interstellar. Now it's inside the Earth's field. That's totally new, totally different. So obviously, as we're starting to see, CO2 is nowhere near a sufficient explanation for this. Sorry, Al Gore, or Henry, you know. He's done his karmic atonement, and we're glad that he lost the presidency because he burned off that car and killed 8 of his wives, but CO2 is not the answer, my friend, I'm sorry. So, what does this ask us? What does this make us ask? Could there be an invisible new force affecting our sun and planets? A force other than gravity, visible light, or heat? Any of these energy fields that we normally take for granted. Could this force exist in higher dimensions? In other words, if it's something that we haven't been able to measure so far, because we feel, most of our scientists feel like they've nailed it all down, they understand all the basic energy fields. Okay, where are they going to get this energy from? Well, we know there are higher dimensions, and we know that you could stick things in there, right? So maybe they're not just garbage, maybe there's something really happening in those higher dimensions. Maybe they're actually having energy flow through them. Does this energy behave like a fluid? That's a very interesting question, because that's actually the answer. That's how it does work. It's as if there's a fluid-like vibrational behavior in a higher dimension, which then precipitates into our physical reality. And I've explained how that works before, and we're going to get into it a little bit more. is this energy, this fluid-like hyperdimensional energy, the source of life, biology, and consciousness. So, as you saw in the 2012 video, Kosnachiev is the first one we're going to go into. We're going to go through new stuff you haven't seen before as well. Those of you who haven't seen this, this is obviously going to be new. Diseased cells, healthy cells. You put a quartz window, which allows infrared light to move through, and then the healthy cells pick up the disease, even though they're hermetically sealed. That's been proven. You put glass in the way, which blocks infrared light, and they don't get sick. They stay healthy. So what this is actually telling us is that the energy field that is causing these cells to get sick and to die is traveling on an infrared beam and then changing the DNA of these cells to give them something inside a sealed container. That's pretty weird, huh? It's pretty weird. Because as far as we know, biology is a closed system. That's why, you trust that if the doctor is wearing a face mask, that if he coughs, that it's not going to go into your body. You're not going to get his germs, right? Well, now it's like if somebody's germy, their energy could be making you sick. Just because they're near you. So this is why it's important to meditate and keep your consciousness clear, because it's when your consciousness takes down that barrier and you become permeable to other people's energy that you can start picking up sickness energetically. So that's something we could talk a lot more about. We don't have time to tonight. Could DNA originate and evolve by outside energy alone? Now this is another very, very fascinating argument, and those of you who've seen the video, I'm proud to say that we have brand new information that I just put in tonight that you've never seen before. So even if you think you're sitting there going, yeah, I know all this stuff, well, there's some stuff that you haven't seen yet because it's brand new. I'm very excited about this. This is Dr. James Strick. He is a Harvard PhD, and he wrote a book called Sparks of Life. And what this book argues is the idea that there are numerous experimental examples of spontaneous generation. And we're going to get into how that works. What is spontaneous generation? It is where life originates from non-living material. Okay, think about that for a minute. You just have, let's say you have sand and water. And the sand and water is just there, and then all of a sudden little guys cook up in it and they become alive, and there was no way that they could have formed because there was nothing living in the sand and the water before. That's what we're talking about. Louis Pasteur and his buddies appears to have been responsible for an orchestrated conspiracy to suppress any knowledge about spontaneous generation from the public discourse. All the scientists who found evidence of spontaneous generation were disbarred and humiliated and intimidated and taken out of the field. And then the guy himself who was responsible for this, which is why we call it pasteurized milk, because he killed the bacteria in the milk by heating it up, he himself had to, well, that can't be right. Get rid of that. Okay? It's not as easily dismissed as conventional accounts would lead us to believe. In fact, just using the word spontaneous generation, if you're in a skeptical crowd of scientists, they're going to howl with, oh man, that guy. History has been completely rewritten in favor of the Darwinian model of evolution, right? That means life has to come from other life, and it has to evolve by these random spontaneous mutations that don't really have anything to do with anything. And maybe my kid is going to have this arm growing out of his stomach, but if that means that he can't kill people as well, then he dies, and then the guy that has two arms over here is the one that gets to go on because he's a better killer. Well, don't you think that if you're this corrupt world Illuminati type of government, right, that you would really appreciate a spiritual philosophy based on he who kills the best is the most evolved? And that to be on the forefront of evolution, you have to be the best killer. It's natural selection. Kill or be killed. That's the real law of the universe. Forget about all this metaphysical and spiritual stuff about love thy neighbor. Kill or be killed. That's what science tells us. So this is why they don't want the Darwinian model to ever be challenged, because it supports the idea that the superior life form is the one that is the best killer. That's just my little political rant. Okay, now, that's a very scary sounding title. Ultrastructural and light microscopy analysis of sapobions formation and growth in vitro. And there's going to be a test at the end of the night. You have to regurgitate this word for word, and you're not going to get to leave the door without drinking the green tea. No, this is a very fascinating study with a very unfortunate name. This is on the Orgone.org website. Just for those of you who want to go check this out, that's where you'll find it. And just remember SAPA. SAPA stands for sand particle. Why didn't they just call it sand particle? I got to make it even more complicated. SAPA bions. Well, bions are little living things made out of energy. And his last name is Pacheco. This man, I believe, is Brazilian. Now, what did he do? He took beach sand and he put it in a Bunsen burner, like he's like a heroin addict cooking up heroin. Except he's cooking up beach sand. He gets it to white hot luminescence. Now, this is what it looks like under the microscope if you don't heat up the sand. If you just keep it at the normal temperature. But when you heat it up, you sterilize the sand, meaning that all the little contaminants and all the little particles that have made it, what it was before, you sterilize it, so there's nothing in there. There's no little germs or little creepy crawlers. It's totally, you've started over from scratch. This is what happens when you don't do that. Now what he did is he cooked up the sand to white hot level and then puts it inside a test tube with distilled water. Now this is totally sterilized. In other words, there is no way that anything living could have survived the heat, and there's no way that anything living could have gotten in because he's doing this in a vacuum. So there's no way that any living stuff could ever get into that tube. Then you just leave the water and the sand in there for a while. And after a while, this scum forms on top, which they give the very scientific name. They don't want to call it scum. That's not very scientific, so they call it a surfactant. Okay. I'll use scum, but surfactant is the technical word. They skim off the surfactant, and they look at it under a microscope. What do you think they see? That's one of the little critters that grows. Now this is growing from total inanimate material. This thing that looks like a little brain grew out of nothing. It's impossible by any conventional science that we have. Life can only form from other life. It cannot form from random material. This is called a microgorgonia. The gorgonia is a sea fan. You can look at it up close and notice the detail. This is just one leaf that broke off of a microgorgonia. These little guys are growing inside the scum, the surfactant, on top of the test tube. This is a little cell. That looks very much like a blood cell, doesn't it? With the little kind of concavity up top there. That's very clearly something that's alive. And you can see crystals as the sand, the silicon is crystallizing. That's what that is, in case you're wondering. Here's another very interesting little thing. Looks like a phagocyte or lymphocyte, like a white blood cell in the bloodstream. But this is growing out of stuff that shouldn't be ever creating life. Now, this is the one that really blows my doors off. Check this little guy out. That's like a fish, right? That's obviously a complex multicellular organism that could not have been in there. He was burned alive in that Bunsen burner. He could not have been alive. He evolved out of nothing. He evolved out of silicon dioxide and water, and that's it. And yet he's got all these little biological systems going. He's got his little defense system with his little spines. He's probably going around eating the other guys, and he's totally happy and fat and content. And here's his little face, and he's like, "Hey there." Okay. Now, so we've established the idea that this little guy obviously has a DNA molecule, right? Where the hell did it come from? Where did this DNA molecule come from? The DNA molecule is so hyper-complex that it could not have evolved by Darwinian random selection unless we had tens of billions of more time for it to have happened on Earth by a random process. It can't happen. The DNA molecule is like the entire Encyclopedia Britannica in terms of the amount of information in it, all crammed into one molecule. He's got DNA. He's probably got 20, 30,000 genes in his DNA making his little body, just like a roundworm. Where did his DNA come from? Where did it come from? There's only one answer. There has to be an implicit wave that creates DNA that's already written into the fabric of the cosmos. And then that wave arranges the materials that it finds in order to create life wherever it can. All right? So if we can establish that, and there's a lot more proof for that, which we'll go into if we have time. Okay, well, that's cool. But what about evolution? what about a species changing from one form to another form? If we've established, right, that this little guy with all his DNA popped up out of nowhere, is he going to stay that way forever? Darwin would say that he has to have a mutation, which generally occurs under an unfavorable condition, like if you're getting hit with radiation. That's why it's a very unfortunate fact that the survivors of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, their bodies mutated. Their arms would get funny looking and stuff like that. They grow, their eye might grow too big or all kinds of grotesque stuff. That's because your DNA is unlocked by the radiation, and it starts to change, it starts to mutate in unpredictable ways. That's why they typically say, well, these big species evolutions in the past are caused when there's a big disaster and the Earth's atmosphere disappears and then the solar radiation hits all the creatures, like an asteroid, right? The asteroid destroys the Earth's atmosphere for a while, radiation hits the creatures, unzips the DNA, causes mutation, and then they change. That's the conventional model, that's as far as it goes. But maybe it's not that simple. So what else could be happening here? Now, we have representation for Dr. Bruce Lipton here tonight. This is the second in command, so to speak, the younger generation thereof. Now, Dr. Bruce Lipton, this is one of the things that he turned me on to from his work. The work of Dr. John Kearns, who's from one of the big universities on the East Coast. MIT, was it, or Harvard, I forget. Anyway, Kearns did a study which seems very, very simple. He takes lactose-intolerant bacteria, okay? What does that mean? It's very simple. It means that you throw them into lactose and they're like, oh man, I don't like this at all. Well, okay, what happens if you take a lactose-intolerant bacterium and you toss him in to what he hates the most and you don't give him any other choice to survive except lactose? What do you think he's going to do? You'd say he's going to die, right? He spontaneously evolves new mouth parts that will digest lactose.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, this is what we knew up until 3 days ago. Now there's a brand new study that just came out, and today is the world premiere of this new information. I'm very happy that you guys are here with me to do this, because it just was published 3 days ago. It's called the Italian wall lizard, and it experiences an evolution, spontaneous evolution in 36 years, very similar to what happened to the bacteria. In other words, changes in the environment stimulate changes in the organism. Is everybody with me? This hit the media 3 days ago on 420. Now, is there anybody here who knows what 420 is also famous for? Is the pot smokers' anniversary year. Okay, so there's this lizard, right? 36 years ago, man. Right around like 1971 when Led Zeppelin and, Jimi Hendrix and The Who. Okay, so they put him on this island. Now, all these years later, he's changed, man. He's totally evolved and transformed himself. This is what the little guy looks like now. This is what his body looks like after he went through the evolution. Okay, so it doesn't seem that remarkable. It looks like any other ordinary lizard. But notice he's in a big tree with vegetation. He was originally, grew up, his technical name is Podarchus sicula. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. In 1971, 5 adult pairs of Podarchus sicula, Italian wall lizard, were moved from their home island in the South Adriatic Sea. Their home island was called Podcapisti, which is a desert island, and they only ate small insects. So they evolved to be able to chase these little guys around, to defend their territory, to chomp down on the insects, which didn't require a whole lot of bite pressure. And so their mouth parts and everything was adapted for these insects. The scientists in 1971 moved them to Pod Mercaru, which is an adjacent island in the South Adriatic Sea, which was loaded with lush vegetation. Now, they did not need to rely on insects. Now they could eat plants, which is an entirely different deal. When you eat plants, you need to have more bite pressure, you need to have a bigger mouth, you need to be able to chew down, you need to have a different digestive system in order to digest plant material.